Star Wars fan films are interesting because they have the potential to show a side of Star Wars that Lucasfilm normally wouldn't. Whether that's because of the financial risk involved with creating media that is very different, or because the stories wouldn't fit Lucasfilm's political narrative, stories written by Lucasfilm recently are formulaic and predictable. But a closer look at the studio's consistent failures could be a topic for another video. If you absolutely do not understand where this position is coming from and need an answer now, go catch up on the newest Bad Batch episodes. Unfortunately, most fan films, with a few exceptions of course, are low-budget trash filmed in a forest, with the story usually being even lousier than the visuals. As terrible storytellers as the big studio writers are, the people who are still somehow passionate enough about Star Wars in its current state to make a fan film on it are much worse. That's probably because anybody with a brain has left the Star Wars fandom by now. One of the stories that a lot of people have always wanted to see from Lucasfilm is an Imperial perspective show or movie, where the protagonist either doesn't A, betray the Empire and start gunning down their former friends in the first act, or B, forget the theme of the story they were in after 5 minutes and start killing what are essentially the equivalent of retarded children. Did you see that? Since Disney knows it would confuse its slow audience, who wouldn't know who to root for in something not completely black and white, it's up to fans and non-canon books to tell these types of stories. This is where Bucketheads comes in. With what is presumably a decent budget and what are clearly some very talented artists, Bucketheads is a step in the direction where we won't have to look only to large studios to provide high-quality cinema. I think most people would agree, Bucketheads has a pretty cool concept, but let's see if the story holds up. The episode starts with the best-looking, highest-quality live-action fan content I've ever seen. The visual effects look big-screen quality. We open on the Battle of Endor, just before the second Death Star explodes, similar to Battlefront 2. An interesting enough time, sure, as the decline of the Empire will provide an easy ground for some moral questions from the characters for the show to stand on. Hopefully, though, they take a different route than Battlefront 2's approach to making the Empire ridiculously cartoonishly evil for no reason, so the main characters have no trouble betraying it. Have the characters always held some sympathy for the other side, and now that the rebels are winning, do they believe it's the quicker way to peace and stability they were chasing after when they fought for the Empire? Nah. Do the characters see some of the Empire's actions as self-destructive, and because of their lifelong, die-hard loyalty to the Empire, fight it to preserve it? Nope. Do the characters believe the Empire doesn't stand for order like it used to, when they find out that it deals with criminal organizations? Not quite. Instead, the Empire starts massacring its own citizens for zero fucking reason. The main characters betray the Empire on a whim, and then, despite lifelong conditioning and propaganda, realize they were fighting on the wrong side all along, and are very sorry.
Yes, we have, ma'am. And there's no excuse for it. We've been fighting our whole lives. It's taken us too long to realize that we were fighting for the wrong side.
Shades of gray instead of black and white, right and wrong, are a huge plus for an Imperial perspective story, so hopefully Bucketheads can work with that somehow. We'll see. The only nitpick I have in the opening scene, surprisingly, is that Maker Save Us.
Maker save us.
Unless I'm missing something, is a droid saying and doesn't make any sense.
Thank the Maker.
Emperor Save Us, or God Save Us, would have been better. The title credits are incredibly creative, and are accompanied by one of the best songs I've ever heard. I'll be interested to see if we actually get some of these sets later in the show, like the Star Destroyer hangar and bridge. The VFX in the opening scene were great, sure, but the practical Endor set left a lot to be desired. We'll get to that. I thought it was funny they put the costume designer's name up next to Officer, but with a cape, because the design is pretty childish. Every main character doesn't have to have their own quirky little piece of clothing or equipment that makes them stand out. It takes away from the strictly disciplined and uniformed military that the Empire is supposed to have. Am I saying it would be impossible for some admiral or whatever to wear some cape around his own ship? No, it's just not normal, and if Bucketheads wants to be a story about the average life in a brutally efficient and disciplined empire, which, disclaimer, I'm not sure it is yet, I'm just assuming, having kooky character designs detracts from that. The next scene we see is some action on what's presumably Endor. The effects generally look great, like the explosions and most of the lasers. The set design is a different story. For some reason, there's ghillie nets over everything, and this stormtrooper is hiding behind a plastic crate. There's also these unneeded, out-of-place, red flashing lights that are attached to nothing in particular. Our heroes are hiding behind sandbags for some reason. It baffles me why they just didn't shoot it out in the forest. A battle on Endor without any visible Imperial technology makes more sense than plastic crates, ghillie nets, and sandbags. If they really wanted some semblance of a position the stormtroopers were holding, they could have painted some plastic boxes to leave in the background, like these ones in the fan film Scorekeeper, or made some metal Star Wars crates. There's this Star Wars looking box right here, and the bunker entrance looks great, so it seems they'd be more than capable. Small thing, this laser explosion comes in from the left, where there are no enemies, and the lady stormtrooper sees it coming while looking straight ahead. They should have shown the stormtrooper watching the X-Wings, see them shoot, and then yell incoming. Like so. I would bet they didn't do this just because they wanted to have the shot of the fighters zooming on by. However, these small details of nonsense combat scenarios add up, which we'll get to in a second. We follow this one stormtrooper who moves his way up the front lines, and the camera work is pretty flawless. It does a good job of showcasing a battlefield with one continuous take. It looks good, but a big problem this scene has is that the characters will spout what I shall dub combat lingo in a nonsensical manner. The stormtrooper who we follow at the beginning says, "Forward! Go, 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 go!" to no one in particular, and he's the only guy moving up. We even see this guy falling back, at a very casual pace. Why not just have another stormtrooper moving with him, so his forward, go, 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 go makes sense. The guy we were following gets shot, and one of the main characters says, maybe the writers don't know what a sniper is, because anyone killed in a combat encounter hasn't been killed by a sniper. How could they possibly know it's a sniper? Maybe they don't expect anyone to think about it and just put it in because it sounds cool. There are other cool combat lingo-ish things that aren't nonsensical. He could have said man down or something. Also, Griffin nerf herders. Sounds retarded. Even if they might have said it in Star Wars, it's not worth undercutting the grittiness of the scene with a stupid sounding insult. Also, in Star Wars, nerf herder isn't the caliber of insult you levy against your worst enemy who just killed one of your men.
What? Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder!
The Empire is made up!
This big brain decides to throw a grenade at our two stormtroopers and yells as he throws it. The "For Jedha" adds nothing to the scene, and it's really awkward, because it's not even clear the guy is sacrificing himself. Maybe it would have made more sense if he was suicide bombing them or something. Also, they say again, and it's even more funny the second time. I want to take a moment here to address something I might get comments about and criticism for: nitpicking. While it's usually self-explanatory which criticisms are nitpicks and which are more important, people love to lump every criticism someone has of a piece of media they like onto that someone's smallest, least important issue, dismissing all arguments because one or more of the problems they had was minor. No, I'm not saying that any of these issues so far are story-breaking, but, to take an analogy from someone else, they are dents and scratches that are unnecessary and could easily be fixed with some thought. I'm going to go through the story pointing out issues as I see them, and while minor, they can 1. Add up to a point where the numerous small issues create a larger one, or 2. Be obvious enough that many viewers notice, however small they are. Although it takes me some time to point out and explain issues, many of them are noticeable on a first watch, and immersion in a high-intensity scene such as this can be immediately ruined. Which brings me to my next point, the action. In the positives category, the wirefall here looks awesome. The lasers, muzzle flashes, and impact points look good. The characters generally utilize cover most of the time, as opposed to running out in the open, hoping to get shot. Most of the passive combat is good, guys just shooting back and forth from cover, but whenever a story beat is added, problems arise. These guys don't have to dive all the way out of their cover to shoot, it makes them look like idiots. It isn't impossible for the stormtroopers to not only hit guys who are completely out in the open. You can have them mostly shoot people who are just peeking from cover, like they do here, or give the rebels some reason to move out from behind cover other than to commit suicide. This guy, instead of throwing the grenade from behind cover, runs out of cover to 10 feet in front of the duo of stormtroopers and gives a weak-ass throw. Seriously, it looks like he's never thrown anything in his life, or maybe he's just not left-handed? If it was impossible to throw the grenade from behind cover, then he should have had some of his rebel buddies cover him. And if that wasn't possible and he was knowingly sacrificing himself, or at the very least taking tremendous risk to get this grenade out, he's doing it to kill 2 guys who are about to be steamrolled by the rest of the rebels anyway. It's like the rebels and stormtroopers switched costumes, but nothing else. While in most of the trash Star Wars media we get these days, everyone in the Empire is an incompetent buffoon who would lose a fight to a 6-year-old, or an accountant.
Missile alone run.
In this instance, where the main characters are Imperial, the rebels are now exactly that. It would be interesting to see our Imperials going up against rebels who must always use their creativity and adaptability to overcome the clearly superior force of the Empire. But for now, they're retarded. Moving on, the captain says he'll cover his friend as he falls back. Our stormtrooper protagonist says, meanwhile the captain has his ass hanging out wide open and is not getting shot. Make it look like they're actually pinned instead of just saying they are. When our man is about to fall back, the captain says hold when there's absolutely no reason to hold. The rebels are literally sprinting toward them. The likelihood of the rebels catching them increases the closer they get. This is more of that cool sounding combat lingo stuff they decided to throw in without understanding what it meant. There's usually a practical reason why in action movies, characters hold before doing something, other than just to build dramatic tension. Here it was added only for dramatic tension without any thought for things making sense, because it sounded cool. A reason they could have given them to hold could have been the captain waiting till they got close enough for him to throw his thermal, and then shooting at them in the confusion to slow them down or at least draw attention away from his escaping comrade. Instead, he just shoots them like normal, and doesn't kill a particularly high number of them because they got closer. Holding just wasted time. Let's stop here for a second. Because they are pinned, the captain immediately defaults to sacrificing himself for one of his men. However, their options include exchanging cover fire as both of them gradually make their way back to safety, ordering their fellow stormtroopers who are 20 feet behind them to cover them as they fall back, throw their thermals to provide a distraction and then fall back, or both the guys and the men right next to them suppress and fall back simultaneously. The captain is doubly stupid because he is a valuable asset to the rest of his platoon. His men are worse off without a captain than they are down one man. As tough a decision as it is, or as selfish as it could come off as, these are the types of decisions stormtroopers would have to make. They're supposed to be practical, not emotional decision makers. What an interesting story it could be about the wavering loyalty to a captain who decided he was more important to his platoon than another trooper. If anything, the other stormtrooper should be offering to sacrifice himself for his captain because he ought to know this as well. Anyways, back to the action. What happened to the men right next to them? Why didn't they help? Are they dead? Did they just abandon their captain when they got orders to fall back? Were we supposed to forget they existed? If they wanted to set the scene as the front lines of a sizable skirmish or a battle, they ought to stick with that. It seems they want to change the setting to these two holding out by themselves and trying to fall back. Here's the solution. The orders come in for a retreat, and these guys and a handful of men act as a rear guard. Moving on, these shots of him running are really cool. That's good. However, the shots of the captain covering his man are sorta lazy because we just see the captain occasionally shooting and hiding behind cover. Maybe have a shot from behind him where we can see what he's shooting at so it's clear he's actually doing something. We see the rebels ducking behind cover, but that's it. Not very impressive for a heroic last stand, but, you might say, if you're some weirdo who talks to their computer, that wasn't supposed to be some overly dramatic last stand. Maybe this is grounding us in a bit of realism where you don't always go out like a badass, even if you're sacrificing yourself for a noble cause. That clearly wasn't the intention, because this is what happens next. This captain, who we've never met in this show, has a gratuitously dramatic death for no reason. I also think it undermines the tragedy of the expendability of stormtroopers. We don't need an overly dramatic, drawn-out death scene to know that this was a human being. If the show wanted to play off of the comedic usage of stormtroopers' lives in the movies and show why it's wrong, they could have killed him instantly, just like all the others. Also, lasers never do this to stormtroopers. Why does this guy run to the side? Are there no rebels over there? Isn't there some semblance of a front line? If the rebels don't have men in that immediate area, you could just flank them. If they do, he's not any further from the rebels he's supposedly falling back from. Heck, he's not even that much further from the rebels right here. I wonder how he's going to escape from them after the captain is finished dying. Stay tuned. Once our retreating man, Torin, reaches the tree, that'd be a good time for him to yell something like, "I've got you covered, now fall back," or something of the sort, instead of just standing there and watching. He could lay down some cover fire and his captain could retreat. Then, since the writers want him dead, the captain could have been shot in the back as he runs. Also, Torin is surprised that his captain died. He did nothing to help him, the captain more or less told him he was going to sacrifice himself 10 seconds ago. Torin shoots a rebel and then starts running away. How is he going to escape this horde of enemies after giving away his position and then running away in shiny white armor through a forest? Well, the camera cuts, so we'll never know. I guess it's not important. On to the next scene. We see Torin carefully moving on through the forest, watching only where he's going, even though the rebels are probably chasing him, from behind him. Cool. Torin comes across this rebel discussing loudly why Holdo's lightspeed ram actually made sense with his Ewok buddy, instead of, being on alert while you're behind enemy lines.
Extremely lucky with that cloud of hyper-accelerated shrapnel, but the primary target wasn't even destroyed. So forget shooting some sort of a hyperspace missile at something like the Death Star. I highly doubt that it would do much of anything, even if it were a huge...
Of course, Torin immediately plans to execute the rebel and his friend, but he steps on a twig. The rebel says,
"What's that?"
instead of just looking around and seeing what that was. Torin decides that now that he's made some really loud noises by shooting someone in an area that could be swarming with enemy soldiers, it's a good idea to go over to the wounded Ewok he shot and look at him for a little while. Of course, Torin has fallen for a classic Ewok trap. Draw the enemy in, let him shoot you, and then hope he walks over to look at you after he does. That'll put him in exactly the right position for the snare to activate and suspend him in the air. If the writers wanted Torin to be caught in a trap, some Ewoks could have lured him over there somehow, run through the trees around him, and when he steps in a direction to get a better shooting angle, it catches him. Makes just a little bit more sense. The Ewoks who forced the rebel and their buddy to set up the suicide trap come over to finish off Torin, whose vision is blurry after not hitting his head on anything. The Ewoks actually look really good. Luckily, he's saved by a gaggle of comedians dressed as stormtroopers. The first one says,
"Let me guess, you had it under control."
This is more of the rebels and stormtroopers switching costumes and nothing else. These are rebels in stormtrooper armor. Showing the stormtrooper's perspective would have been showing ruthlessness, professionalism, and efficiency, not funny man quips, jokes, and gags. You can build a story around characters who are no nonsense, and these are the types of characters who you think would be the last people to be making bad jokes in a serious situation. It could make sense that the rebels would do it, as they're a ragtag band of freedom fighters, but hardened soldiers who see themselves as elite professionals aren't going to do this. You can't write an Imperial perspective story but remove the effects it would have on the characters. This was the problem with Finn in the sequels, a man born and raised as a soldier and somehow being a slapstick comedian after years of propaganda and brainwashing. Also, these guys are on a massive time crunch. It's not really the time to be laughing it up with your pals.
Happy?
Ecstatic.
Same thing. Not funny, not badass, just lame. Our squad of stormtroopers move out, presumably heading back to Lyra to help out old Commander Kern. While Torin, who's in charge now, holds up the squad to listen to some radio chatter, the lady stormtrooper asks where the captain is.
Where's the captain?
He didn't make it.
He didn't make it is a cliche, overused, out-of-place line in this instance. A nitpick, to be sure, but these cliche, quippy, and predictable lines all add up. Having him say something like dead instead of he didn't make it would also show that, as a soldier, he's used to people around him dying. There's never any time to dwell on things like that because the mission is more important. Shirking the word death seems out of character for someone who I think it's safe to assume is familiar with it. This woman is the same way. She stands there in horror for a good 4 seconds. Have their friends never died before? I figured from the previous Bucketheads film these were hardened stormtroopers. This doesn't mean that they've lost every shred of humanity. It means they're probably used to keeping their head in the game at all times. A damn it, or who's in command now, would have been more in character for a battle-hardened stormtrooper. Anything but standing there in complete shock. They all should know any one of their days could be numbered. The Death Star promptly explodes, and I think this moment is a really strong part of the episode, even though it would have been hard to mess up. It shows that the characters are shocked that their empire could be beaten, and that they thought things were in control until the very end. It's a moment that could throw even these experienced troopers off for a minute. If seconds before, we had seen how they had reacted to their captain's death with little remorse, it would have made this more impactful. These men, who are desensitized to death and blood, who ruthlessly carry out their mission and stop for almost nothing, are taken aback for a split second. Something else that could have added to the moment is all of the men taking their helmets off to see it with their own eyes. Only the main characters doing this takes away from the all these guys are human theme. I'm not sure if they're actually going for a all these guys are human theme, but in my opinion, they should be. I think the reasoning is pretty self-explanatory. After they get a hold of themselves, Torin says,
Fall back. Fall back.
From what I could tell, that's what they're already doing, so something like let's move would be a better fit. This is a really small thing, but I mentioned them all. It doesn't hurt the gravity of the moment in the slightest, though. The stormtroopers hurry back to base in some really dope looking camera work. The X-Wings flying over the trees here is representative of the rebels dominating, if that's the intention. They should distort more as they fly over the trees, though. Our friend Tobin hears some blaster fire and leaves formation. He does it without telling anyone, even though I'm pretty sure he's in command at this point. Why doesn't he order his men to stop? If he wants to go himself, why wouldn't he tell them to go on without him? What if his men come back to look for him and put themselves in danger because of it? He heard gunfire, which somehow nobody else heard, so the logical thing to do would be either to investigate with your team or keep moving as a team. These guys are supposed to be practical professionals, but he's acting like an instinctive buffoon. If the show really wants him separated from his squad for whatever reason, have him say he's going to check out the noise. Someone else tells him that they have to keep moving, and he can say, keep moving, I'll catch up, and they can reluctantly do so. Anything's better than him sneaking off from his own team. Torn comes across this wounded stormtrooper holding a detonator.
Go, I'll cover you.
What's your name?
TK-1977.
Your real name.
This line right here really hits it home that this isn't a story about stormtroopers. This isn't a unique perspective if the characters are identical to the ones on the side we've seen before but wearing different armor. An interesting story could have come from men unconcerned with emotional connection and invested in preservation of order through any means necessary. Stormtroopers have never been invested in human connection over practicality. There are men under those masks, but such weaknesses should have been drilled out of the optimal stormtrooper. Sure, all the stuff we've seen about stormtroopers being trained to be practical, proficient, cold-hearted, unemotional, and professional could have just been what the Imperials preach and don't practice. But even if there's a sensible reason, it's a much less interesting story. Pretending they're just like the rebels but on the wrong side of the war is boring and unoriginal. In this instance, asking for the man's name, trying to establish connection with a guy who seems off the hinges is probably the best move, but it's not one you think the stormtroopers would consider. Having one of the characters' weaknesses, being their lack of empathy that they were instilled with in the Empire, could add character flaws to an otherwise 2D cast and a new perspective to a fandom devoid of original ideas. This last part, where it seems Varric has lost hope after the Empire seemingly crumbled before their eyes, I think is really good. Or at least I think that's what it's implying. It initially seems like Varric is giving up because of his injuries.
Save yourself, go, I'll cover you.
They don't really make it clear that Varric has lost all hope in the Empire, but Torn responds like he did. It dampens the exchange a bit, but it's still powerful. Varric could have mentioned something about it all being over, so Torn can respond with this badass line directly.
Now look, Varric, I'm not gonna lie, this looks bad, but that's why the Empire needs every man right now. Do you understand that, soldier?
I'd like to clarify that Torn saving this man doesn't play into the Rebels and Stormtrooper armor problem at all, because Torn gives a practical reason, that they need every man they can get. Again, you can have serious, gruff characters and still have emotional scenes. This conversation is definitely the best part of the episode. I just wish it wasn't preceded with all the other awful parts before we managed to get here. Torn helps Varric up and they begin to walk away. Then the episode ends. The fact that all these people came together and made a fan film with production value this high is incredible. I didn't really mention all the times I was impressed by the visual effects, costumes, and music, but it really was something to behold. This makes the awful writing so much more depressing, because nobody hates the mainline movies and shows for their lack of visual beauty and high-budget effects. The potential to turn to fans to tell good stories when studios are incapable of doing so could have been Star Wars' saving grace. That's all for my review of Bucketheads Episode 1. Thanks for sticking around. Have a blessed day.